Responsive design was born primarily out of the need to deal with the explosion of mobile devices that started being able to browse the web, much in the same way that a desktop browser user browsed the web. I found this line graph on the web, and it's attributed to some research done by Morgan Stanley Research. I don't really know how exact any of these numbers are, but the general point is well known. Browsing on mobile devices exceeds that of a regular desktop browser. And if you look at this graph, that sounds just about right, that this actually happened around 2013, 2014. So it's been a little bit since that happened. So the point is, you just can't ignore mobile. You have to design your sites for mobile as well. But when it comes to mobile, there's so many devices. So which devices do we want to target and which devices do we want to support? And the answer is really all of them. You can't really afford to ignore any of them. There's such a plethora of these devices out there, and ignoring some of them would ignore a chunk of your user base. So how does responsive design help us do that? Well, I think the answer lies in what responsive design is. So what is a responsive website? Well, that's a site that's designed to adapt its layout to the viewing environment by using fluid, proportion-based grids, flexible images, and CSS3 media queries. And by proportion-based grids, what we mean is, or hinting to, is that the width of these grids, or these columns, as we'll see in a moment, should be specified using a percentage. I really like this visualization that somebody put together and put on Wikipedia when you search for responsive design. So this is one of the images on that page. And this is basically paraphrasing, or maybe actually taking verbatim, a quote from Bruce Lee, a famous martial arts expert. And basically it says, you put water in a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water in a bottle, it becomes the bottle. And you put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. And the idea is pretty simple. The content should be like water. You put it in whatever different devices you put it into, and it should still display, the content should be the same, and the information conveyed should be the same. And perhaps the only thing that's different is the shape of that content, right? The way it's being displayed. So using kind of the idea of the previous graphic, we could certainly understand now that the site's layout is supposed to adapt to the size of the device. In practice, most of the time, if not all the time, this means that the site should adjust based on the width of the device. And I should also point out that content verbosity, or its visual delivery, may change. For example, for a restaurant site, a phone number which used to be displayed somewhere in the site without attracting too much attention to itself for a desktop version of that site is now front and center and the most prominent item on the page on the mobile site. And that's perhaps because we want people to have the phones, once they have the phone, to be able to just to tap and call and put their order in, or perhaps we just don't have the flexibility in the mobile device to let them go and find that phone number somewhere else or just glance at it because of our real estate, being so small. That's number one. Number two is some parts of the site may even be hidden on the mobile version, as we now have to measure very carefully which parts are the most crucial. Now, are there any alternatives to the responsive design principles? Well, actually there are. What you could do is you could have a server-side technology that detects your user agent, in other words, the type of browser that you're using, and figure out whether or not you're on a mobile device or on a desktop device. And then, based on that information, either serve up a regular desktop version of the website or serve up to the client the mobile version of that website. And this is basically what the websites that wanted to have a mobile version as well used to do before the responsive design kind of came to the forefront. But the problem is there's a couple of issues with this type of approach. Number one is you have high risk of feature diversion between apps, because now you really, technically speaking, now have really two different applications running your website. One is a mobile version, one is a desktop version, number one. And number two is, well, mobile devices are just too varied in size among themselves. So it's hard to make a mobile site that satisfies every client. So what ends up happening is that you end up sacrificing user experience because you're trying to kind of make one mobile website that fits them all. And that basically never works. So nowadays, by and large, because of these issues, people really stay away from this approach. The largest part of responsive design is obviously the layout. And the most common layout out there, or responsive layout, is a 12-column grid responsive layout. And this is what Twitter Bootstrap uses, and just about almost really every responsive framework out there uses nowadays. And the reason 12 is what's used is because of the factors of 12. You could basically, it's evenly nicely divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and obviously 12 itself. Which means we could subdivide our page into sections that are evenly split and nicely lay out themselves. So for example, we can have content that is split into 3 columns out of the 12. So it's 3, 3, 3, 3, so that all adds up to 12. Now, in case you're confused, I just left some padding here. I guess I kind of assumed there's going to be some padding over there just for visualization and be able to see the different columns easier. And obviously you can have 6 and 6 in this layout, and 4, 4, and 4, and any other combination you want. You can have 8 and 4, you can have 9 and 3, and so on. And the approach to these responsive layouts is that we know that the browser window is 100%, right? That's the width of the browser window, which means that we can calculate what one column in this 12-column grid layout is. That's 100% divided by 12, and that turns out to be about 8.33%, which means when we specify in our framework, in our Bootstrap or whatever it is we're using, how wide a particular column should be, we could convert these 3s into 25% because 3 columns is 25% of 12 columns, and the 6 columns become 50% of the 12 column, and the 4, 4, 4 becomes 33.33%. And obviously we're not limited to having just one 12 column grid layout. We could certainly have nested ones. So if you have 4, 4, and 4, inside each 4 columns, we can consider that 100% and then have another 12 column grid layout inside of it. So here in the first on the left one, we see 6 and 6, and the middle one we see a bunch of 3s. And the left one, or the most right one, we see 4, 4, and 4. And that's totally acceptable. In fact, is done all the time. Okay, so enough theory for part 1 of this lecture. And in part 2 of this lecture, we're going to go ahead and jump into the code editor and see these concepts in action.